So let me start off by saying hello properly. Hello properly, I suppose. Hello. I'm Mike Taulty. I work for Microsoft in the UK. I saw one or two of you in my session yesterday, so we've kind of met before, or we may have met somewhere else in the past. Hello, welcome to this session. Come on in, yeah. We need all the people we can get. Come on in. Have a seat, make yourself comfortable. It's going to be good. So, you just wondered, I'm Mike Taulty from Microsoft. I work here in the UK. I'm part of the developer and platform group. So we go out and work with devs and talk to devs about things that are going on with our platform. I have all the different ways, most of the different ways, apart from my direct phone number, that you can get in touch with me if you want to mail me, if you want to website me, whatever that is, if you want to tweet at me. Those are all there on the slide. And feel free to take those and use them. I'll do my best to get back to your mails, even if it's to say, I can't answer this mail, I don't understand what you're on about. Or, I'll try and find somebody at Microsoft who knows about the vagaries of licensing this talk server or something, if that's what it is you want. I don't know the answer to questions like that, fortunately. What we're going to talk about here is Windows 8.1 from the point of view of app developers. Can I check who you are? Not individually, I'm not going to put you through the pain of that. Are you people who have built apps for Windows at all? Have you built something for Windows? So, mostly yes. Are you building those, or Windows Phone? Anyone doing Windows Phone but not Windows? No? Okay, cool. Have you built those things in .NET? Is that pretty much what people have done? Anyone built one in JavaScript? No? Anyone built one in C++? No? Okay. We're doing a great job of investing all those millions of dollars in those technologies. No, actually, it's just recorded. Let's carry on. I keep forgetting about that camera at the back. Be careful, haven't you? So here we'll talk about Windows 8.1. I'll kind of break into it because it's the first session of the day. We'll look at some pictures and things, and then we'll talk about some specific different areas where we've changed some things. Hopefully you'll get a reasonably rounded view of what we've done. So as a way of kind of recapping and saying where we are on those kinds of things, and feel free to chip in. There's not a lot of us, so and for you, you're facing this way, so you don't get recorded on the camera in the same way that I do. Where are we? These are approximate numbers. So we're about 18 months or so into the release of Windows 8. We shipped this thing in October 26, 2012, if I remember rightly. So we're around about 18 months into here. A bunch of things that happened along the way. I'm only going to categorize two, really. We've seen some new devices. Some of these devices I find quite interesting, quite exciting. I've got one of these. This is the Dell Venue 8 Pro. Anyone got one of these at all? See one of these? I'm not trying to sell you one of these, but I know one for Dell. Gorgeous little Windows 8 device, 8-inch tablet. Really interesting little device. Most of the people I know who've used this device with Windows 8 say that's the best device I've seen with Windows 8. It's a really interesting little device. So that came along partway through this timeline. It's a little Atom-based device, not an ARM-based processor, an Atom-based device. So you can potentially run something like Visual Studio on it, although I wouldn't really recommend it, but you could if you wanted to. We've seen devices like this thing come along from Nokia, the 2520. This is an ARM-based device, quite a nice tablet. If you've not seen one of those, it's quite nice. But yeah, this is ARM running Windows RT rather than Windows 8. We've seen our Surface line change along the way. So we started off with the Surface RT and the Surface Pro. They changed to be the Surface 2 and the Surface Pro 2. While we are on camera, I'll just say the Surface 2 is miles better than the Surface 1, and we'll leave it at that. Very, very nice devices. I would see a lot of people, some of the presenters here actually got Surface Pro 2s. This seems to be in some ways becoming like a power user's device of choice in some way. There's quite a lot of people using these things. I haven't got one, but they're very nice, quite powerful. You can get i7 processors in it, but you can still rip the keyboard off and use it in a tablet. It'd be better if it had longer battery life and was thinner, but it's still a very, very nice device. And then all the way up into these big all-in-one devices, like this Lenovo here. I've still got a vague plan to get one of these for the front room in our house to stick music and photos on it and just use it as a touch-based device. Of course, if you looked at Windows 8, you'll know that it spans across all of this set of devices, and that's in many ways one of our key differentiators, that we have one operating system spanning across all this huge range of devices. In terms of where we are with apps, there's been a bunch of apps arrived for Windows 8 since we shipped it 18 or so months ago. Some of these things that you see on the screen. I think I'm right in saying that the latest numbers that we've published, there's been around about 140,000 apps gone into the Windows 8 store since we released Windows 8. which is not too bad over 18 months. That's actually quite fast growth for an app store. It's kind of easy to look at the other stores like the iTunes store and the Google Play store and say, yeah, but there's nearly 1 million apps in those stores. Obviously, they've been out a little bit longer, and this growth is actually quite fast. And there's, some of the big players are within the store at this point, things like Netflix and Kindle and so on. And then some really innovative ones, which I don't know if you've seen. I've used apps like Fresh Paint. Have you seen Fresh Paint and what that thing does? Especially if you've got a digitizer and a stylus for that thing. Just a really, really gorgeous painting application. If you've not played with it, it's worth playing with just to get an idea what modern UI can do on Windows 8. It's a really, really nice application. But anyway, this is kind of background in many ways. 12 months after releasing Windows 8, we released Windows 8.1. And that's what we're here to kind of talk about, the deltas between the two here today. Just to set the scene for that, it's a free upgrade to Windows 8.0. Anyone who's on Windows 8.0 should be able to go into the store and just get 8.1 and install it and run it. It runs Windows 8.0 apps. So if you go into the store, you will get listed Windows 8.0 apps. But if there's a Windows 8.1 app from the same app on Windows 8.1 in the store, we will prefer that app, obviously, over a Windows 8 app. So if you build two versions of your app, we will prefer your 8.1 app on Windows 8.1. In terms of building for this, this is a little bit more complicated. If you want to build for 8.1, you need Visual Studio 2013. You can use one of the paid editions or one of the free editions of that thing. It also comes with .NET Framework 4.5.1 versus 4.5, which is what was on Windows 8. And all those things are out there to be downloaded either for free, or if you want to give us money, you can give us money and do it that way as well. In terms of building for this stuff, you can continue to build for Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. And you can have two apps in our store, one for 8 and one for 8.1. It's fair to say that at this point not everybody has upgraded to Windows 8.1. So there's a lot of people still on Windows 8. So you might not want to build an app that's purely for Windows 8.1 because you're going to miss those people who are still on Windows 8. So you can submit an app for 8.0 and 8.1. You can put them both into our store. It gets a little bit complicated in terms of Visual Studio. You can use VS 2013 to make 8.1 projects, as you would expect. If you've got one of the paid versions of VS 2013, you can also use it to edit and maintain 8.0 projects. But if you've not, you would need VS 2012 to create, edit, and maintain your Windows 8.0 projects. 2013 can upgrade an 8.0 project to an 8.1 project. Does what I just said make any sense? Because it made my brain hurt when I said it. Okay. One thing to say is that if you submit two apps into the store, an 8.0 and an 8.1, be careful with your version numbers. We make an assumption in the store that any 8.1 version will have a higher version number than your highest 8.0 version. So if you're on version 4 of 8.0, don't submit your 8.1 app at 5. Leave a space for things you might want to fix in your 8.0 app so that we can make sure you've got a gap in between the two. If your 8.0 app gets 10 and your 8.1 app is at 9, I don't know what happens. But it doesn't work. We know that much. So just be careful with that. So you want to watch out for. Actually, in the store itself, when you submit two apps for 8.0 or 8.1, most of the metadata about the app is shared. So you don't have to enter everything twice, but you can enter separate descriptions for the two apps, and you can have separate screenshots for the two apps. So if you've added features in your 8.1 version of the software, you can catalog that in the store and list it up there in the store. So what changes as we go from 8.0 to 8.1? Quite a lot, actually, as it happens. There's a lot of sort of list of things, and that clicker's not going to work over there. We haven't done anything radical. We haven't thrown anything away or reinvented anything or anything like that. We're still in the same world of a modern Windows 8.0 app, but we add quite a lot of things for capabilities and change one or two things for 8.1. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not going to get through all of this stuff in the little talk that we've got here. Just picking out some examples here, things like support for 3D printing, things like support for geofencing, things like support for point-of-sale devices like barcode scanners, things like let's have a look, support for custom USB devices. So we've done quite a lot of work from, it's only a 0.1, but we've done quite a lot of work from 8.0 to 8.1. I'm going to categorize some of these things down and show you some things that I think are perhaps not necessarily most relevant, but probably the things that would hit most developers, as opposed to perhaps some things that only certain developers would use. You can categorize these in some ways into various different areas. Things like we've done some work on our controls, we've done some work on how applications are packaged, we've done some work on how we deal with files or devices, we've done some work in tooling, we've done some work up at our store. And we'll talk about some of these things as we go through. So I think the way that I've kind of categorized this down is that this is a 3 or 4 foot gap and this thing doesn't want to span it. The things we'll actually talk about is not all of that stuff. We'll talk about just some sections from there. And I'm also going to talk about them, and I think this should work out okay for you. I'm going to talk about them in the sense of a .NET developer's perspective. So pretty much I think everything I'm going to show will be in .NET. I'm not going to show... One of the things with Windows 8.1 is because we have 3 primary strands of development technology, you can build a native app in JavaScript, C++ or .NET, you can get into a thing of having to show everything 3 times. And I don't want to do that, so we're just going to show things once and we'll focus on .NET as we do that stuff. So 3 sections where we'll talk about these things. We'll talk about some bits and pieces in Visual Studio 2013. Did anyone go to Giles' session yesterday about 2013? We're in there. There might be a little bit of overlap, but I don't think too much, because I noticed when he got to the bit about app development, he said something like, hey, we've done some stuff for app development. Well, we'll show some of that stuff here, some of those bits and pieces. We'll talk about some of the new capabilities and changes that we've made in the user interface. We'll talk about some of those things, and that's probably the bigger thing that we'll play with here. That's probably the bigger section. And we'll talk a little bit about things that we've done with the Windows Store for obviously selling applications and purchases from those applications. So, okay, let's start with Visual Studio, and let's wander off and play with Visual Studio instead of playing on PowerPoint. And by the way, as I sit on the laptop, if I get a bit quiet, just let me know, because I've not got a mic in here and I could mumble into the laptop if I'm not careful. So just let me know. And the other thing I'll say, and it's not a cop-out in any way, I am running at 1024 by 768 here today, so I might sort of fumble around the screen a little bit more than I would usually do, because this is very low resolution to me these days. So let's have a look at a few things. We'll start off with some fairly simple things. Let me run up, see if my mouse will work. Let's run Visual Studio. And so from a tooling perspective, let's play with a few things in Visual Studio. First thing we might do is make a new app. So let's just go and make a new project in here. And we can wander into, as I said, .NET, C#, Windows Store, and let's make a grid-based application. Should be fine, and let's just OK that. And that makes me a grid app. People built a grid app before, they've used this template and kind of give you just a quick idea. If you've not used this template, what it makes, if we just run it, is a very sort of simple application. It's a bunch of data grouped into a grid view control on the screen. We have groups with titles. So to navigate through those things, you can have a look at an individual group. Groups have items, and you can navigate to an item this way. I don't know why there's never a description on an item. It feels a little bit blank to me. I'd have put something in that template myself. Or you can navigate this way, and then you get into the same sort of item that you got into before. I don't think it does semantic zoom. It doesn't do semantic zoom. It might do a little bit in terms of the display. No, it doesn't do too much. And we'll talk about doing that a little bit later on anyway. Let's close something down. Right back over here. So that's the template. Let me show you a couple of things that have changed in terms of Visual Studio in here. Let's open up that main page that we were just looking at. So let's just go over, it's actually called the Grouped Items page. It's over here. And let's open that thing up. A couple of things you should notice. We say this often, we always mean it, and we certainly have done it here. We've done a lot of work around the XAML editor on its stability. We've done a lot of work on the XAML editor around its performance. You should also find it just generally more pleasant to use. I'll give you an example of something that I think is really quite pleasant to use, very different from what we had before. If we pin out the document outline over here for a second, what we've got on the screen here is a grid view control. So there's the grid view control. And if you've ever looked at one of these things in XAML, you'll know that this is a templated control, and it has a template for every item that it displays. And you'll know that if you go in and edit that template in the designer, you jump off into a slightly weird separate design experience where you can design the template, but you can't see what's actually going on. And what we've done with that is we've changed that in Visual Studio. If you wander into this template and edit the item template here, we edit that item template in line on the design surface as nature probably always intended, but we never quite managed to implement before. And it's really quite nice, you know, so you can see here's the template that we're editing, and I can wander in, I can see that template has a border and an image and a stat panel, and if we grab that border, even at this low resolution, we can pick this thing up and, you know, we can in-line see how badly we can damage this design just by dragging the mouse around in a random way. But you get the idea as to how that inline editing works. That's just Control-Z that. We can take this text block and say, no, this should be really wide, or this should be really high, or whatever it might be. And you can get an idea of the effect you're actually having, rather than jump into a separate editing experience, which is quite nice. In the XAML editor down here, a few things that we've done work on. You'll notice that this data template here is a grid in this case, and somewhere in there is an image. That image is data bound to a property called image path. Again, for the first time in any of our XAML editors, we now get IntelliSense on those data bindings if Visual Studio can figure out what object is living behind this, and it can't always because you can do this dynamically. We're not magicians, you know, so it's not possible. But if it can, it will, and it figures that out that way. Just looking up above here, you'll notice that the background is using a new kind of resource. You might have seen static resource, dynamic resource. This is a themed resource, kind of does what you would expect, you know, the different resource for the different themes, light and dark on Windows 8. If you notice what it's doing, it's looking up a brush called List View Item Placeholder Background Brush, which kind of trips off the tongue, really. Again, no one really wants to look that up, no one wants to type that in, so we give you IntelliSense on that brush. It was called List View something or other, and I still can't remember what it was called. But we give you IntelliSense on that, and it's intelligent IntelliSense. So we're looking through all your resource dictionaries and our resource dictionaries, and we're finding brushes. We're not just finding random objects, we're actually finding brushes. So you get the right thing. I'm just going to Control-Z that because I can't even remember what it was called. It was called, did I really delete it by character? No, there we go. It was called that. Other thing we give you on this, just like you can in .NET code, where you can hit F12 or you can right mouse and go to a definition, you can do that for XAML-based resources here as well. So if we right mouse on this and say go to definition, we can jump, and this is the massive set of brushes that are providing those resources. You want to find where something is defined, you can just go to definition on XAML-based resources. We could also open this folder here, and I won't get into this too much, but if you looked at what we did with Windows 8, if you built one of those apps, you would have found in your project a file called standardstyles.xaml, and we copied it into every single project under the sun, which from a software perspective is not probably a great idea. We've changed that, and we now have a different way of providing our standard styles to you. They live in this folder here, and they don't get copied into every project. I also met developers who hacked those styles within their projects, which was kind of okay, but probably not really the intention. Don't hack this generic .xaml file and this theme resources file. It's meant to be in one place. Derive styles from it and do your own thing with them in your own files. I was going to say, I don't know if this actually works, but we'll try it. One of the things we added to Visual Studio 2013 is this idea of peak definition. You might have seen it in Giles' session yesterday. I don't know whether you can do a peak definition on a XAML resource like this, so we're about to find out by hitting Alt and F12. I think the answer is no. Okay, that was an interesting one to try, wasn't it? If we look, what else can we do with this guy here? Let's have a look at another different resource for a second. Let's just close that guy down. Just to carry on that theme of looking things up, if we go to this item detail page over here, somewhere down here, we will find something else that's data bound. So we have a title over here that's data bound. This is obviously coming from some object behind. We can also try and do go to definition on that. So show me the code that's providing that data bound property called title. So I'll not try Alt F12, I'll just try F12 in this case. And we jump across to that .NET source that's providing that title property, and I can see it's a sample data item.
Is that clever enough to kind of follow Prism? attributes and all sorts of injections and craziness going on?
It has to be able to figure what the type is behind. So if we can figure out where the type is, we'll jump to it. But there are circumstances where you're jumping through some kind of clever view locator, and there's no way we can trace that through other than by running the code, and we can't do that. So it goes as far as it can go, really, with that kind of thing. And if we go back to that main view for a second, let's go back over here. Let's go back to the group titles page. One of the things that this is really, really reliant on, just here, is it's displaying design time data, which is what's letting me design these templates at design time. In this particular sample, there's a file over here called sampledata.json, which is actually providing that design time data. And you can see it's just a JSON file. This is kind of nice if you've got somebody who wants to create this kind of design time data for you. If you work in that sort of place where you can get somebody to do that, or if you have to do it yourself, it's kind of nice if you've got the time to do that. Typically, most people don't have the time to bang out a sample data file like this, or a design time data file like this. So one thing we've done is we've put back something that we had in previous versions of our design tool Blend. So if we get rid of this sample data file here, let's just obliterate that for a second. And that's gone, although Visual Studio is still displaying it because it caches it somewhere. Let's just go and open this up in Blend. Go over to the design tool and just save things over here. One thing that we've added back over here, we want the, oh yeah, that's right. So you notice our design time data's gone because I got rid of it. One thing that we've added back into Blend is the data tab up here. You might have seen this before in Silverlight and WPF. It's back for Windows 8.1 applications here. And you can add design time data. So you can create data manually, or you can create it from a class definition. And so what we can do is point this at a class. We have this data source in our project as part of the template. So we can click OK, and Blend will reflect over that class and see what it thinks that thing looks like. And if we just expand this thing out, you'll see that it's figured out there's a bunch of groups, and groups have descriptions and titles and so on. And then within a group there's a bunch of items, and items have descriptions and titles and so on. And we can play around with this a little bit if we want to. We could say, let's say this title here follows a particular format. Let's say we think it's a company name, and we'll generate some company names for you. Let's say that this title is some kind of person's name. We'll generate some names for you there. And all this thing is doing is creating a sample data XAML file, which we can look at the angle brackets for over there. There's the sample data that's generating. We can save that. And it actually gives it a horrible name. So where is it? Sample data source sample data.xaml. I'm just going to rename that so that I don't have to type that thing in. I'll call it s.xaml. Now it's called s.xaml. And we can wander back over to Visual Studio. Let's just reload that. And then we can navigate back down here and find this collection that we're using. And it's not using that JSON file anymore. It should be using sample data s.xaml. And we can get rid of this type because you don't need to tell Visual Studio types if you're using XAML rather than JSON. And we've got our sample data, our design time data is what it really is back on the screen. Which is quite a nice way. It's not magic. Again, you have to take some care with the way you design your object structure such that it can play nicely with this. But nonetheless, it's there and it's quite a nice thing to be able to do. All right, let's talk about something a little bit different. I think Giles hinted at this a little bit in his session yesterday. If you're building Windows 8.1 applications, then you write an awful lot of asynchronous code. Wherever you talk to the file system, the network, the user, anything that might take any time at all, we don't generally offer you a synchronous API. We offer you only asynchronous APIs. It's a good idea, I think, on our part. We're trying to do the right thing. What it means is that if you look at how that stuff can be debugged in Visual Studio 2012, it can be a little bit painful. If you try to debug one of these apps, you can often land in a call stack that says, hey, you threw an exception here, and we have no idea how you got to that piece of code. And you stare at it and think, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this. We tried to improve that quite a bit with 2013. I'll try and show you that. Let's just make a blank application. Yes or no, doesn't matter. And let's just pop to the UI of this blank application and just drag something onto the screen so we can write some code. And let's grab a button. And let's just put some code behind that button. And I've got a little piece of code somewhere probably. Let's just see if I've got a piece of code. Ah, yeah, good. Let me just rename that. This is a nasty sort of devious bit of code really in a way. Oh, let me just resolve some namespaces. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so I've tried to be a little bit devious, not too devious. When you click that button, we've got an asynchronous method that awaits calling this function called callAsync with a value of 3. CallAsync is an asynchronous function. If we are 3, we don't do that bit. And we await calling async with 2, and then with 1, and then with 0. So we've got a recursive asynchronous call stack. What a nasty, nasty thing to do. And then finally, if we only get down to 0, we await task.delay. This is not the same as blocking with thread.sleep. This is awaiting task.delay. And then we fire the debugger to see what's going on. So this is not something you would actually do, but it's kind of convenient for me because it all fits on that one 1024 by 768 screen. So let's see what Visual Studio 2013 makes of that. Let's just do that. 1, 2, 3-ish. Fine. If you were to have a look at this in 2012, you would find yourself in the middle of no man's land. Where you find yourself in 2013 is not a bad place. If we have a look at this, you can see that we're in callAsync, and we are resuming an asynchronous method. The stack below shows you what it actually means to resume an asynchronous method, starting off with probably synchronization context.invoke. The stacks below don't show you that, but what they do show you is there was an async call from callAsync, from callAsync, from callAsync, and from button click. The thing about this, you might like this or you might hate this depending on the kind of person you are. This is not reality. But it's easier to think about than what reality is. This is a constructed thing, but I find it much better than trying to figure out why the heck have I landed on this particular line of code. We are instrumenting things such that we can put a call stack back in place that doesn't really exist. And we're telling you about it because it's got this little marker on it there. The other thing that you would have noticed in Visual Studio 2012 is that if you were to look at your tasks window, which is quite a nice window to be aware of if you don't use it, if you looked at your tasks window, you would have probably seen one task here or two, because where you were doing awaits, that doesn't necessarily involve any task instances as such. But what we show you here is a view that suggests that you've actually sparked up lots of separate tasks, and you can actually see when those tasks started. You can see where those tasks are in terms of the code call stacks over here. And so you can get a view as to what's actually going on inside of your application. I think this is really nice. If somebody gives you a crash dump from one of these applications and you have to try and debug it, and it was in an async handler and it's through an exception, you really are in the middle of nowhere. You just look at it and think, I have no idea. 2013 makes that a lot nicer from the point of view of trying to figure that out. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. A couple of other things in the tools. One thing I'll just show you quickly. You might have seen this a little bit in Giles' session yesterday. Let's make another project. We could go back to our grid. We'll make a new one just in case. We added a couple of new tools around inspecting what's going on inside of XAML. I've kind of been around the XAML frameworks for quite a long time, and one of the tricky things with XAML is you create a big XAML file, and it's got templates and stuff in it, and you feed it to a XAML engine and it displays it, and if it does what you want, that's good, and if it doesn't, there's not a lot of visibility inside that XAML engine as to what the heck it's doing. We've tried to do improvements around that using our event tracing for Windows technology that we've had for quite a long time, all the way back to Windows 2000. So the XAML guys have instrumented what's going on inside of that engine, and the Visual Studio guys have built a tool to try and surface that to you. It's not the only tool you can use to see it, but it's a very convenient one. So that shows itself up in a couple of ways. The way I'll show you here is from the new Performance Hub in Visual Studio 2013. And so what you can do is you can have a look, for instance, at what your XAML UI is doing from a performance point of view with this little guy here, the UI responsiveness tool. Let's just start that up, and it should run the app. That's fine. And so here's our app. We're on the home screen, and we can navigate around a little bit. We don't actually have any performance issues as such in this template. And we can navigate into a group, we can navigate into an item, and we can come back, and we can come back. And that might be, you know, from the point of view of just warming up the tool, that might be enough to just get some data into that tool. Let's see if we can just grab that. And what it does, it draws you a nice little graph of what's been going on in that very short session. You know, in a real session, you have real data in here. Across the top of the screen, you've got the timeline. This is when the application was activated. Oh, no. This is when the activations sort of ended. So that's like getting the app onto the screen in the first place. And then we get a couple of graphs. One here shows you how many frames per second you were getting off the 2 threads that are involved in putting your stuff onto the screen. One is your UI thread, which you're probably intimately familiar with, and one is the composition thread, which is the bit that actually we hand stuff off to do the drawing. You can see that here there were some little drops in performance on my UI thread, sort of here and here, probably as I was wiggling around stuff on the screen, something like that. Generally speaking, I find the graph up above a bit more interesting, which shows you what the UI thread was doing. Was it parsing XAML? Was it laying out XAML? Was it running your stuff? Or was it doing something else that we can't quite identify? And if you look at this graph, you can see here there was some layout, there was some parsing, there was some app code on my part. We could zoom this down a little bit to that particular section of the chart. And then down below, you can see, hey, what XAML files were you playing with in that time period? So not surprisingly, we ran app.xaml. We had to load that up. If you were I don't think I can actually, no, I can't, but I can hover on it. We also read the theme resources XAML file, but you might spot if you were really sharp-eyed that it's not a XAML format, it's one called XBF, which is another binary format that we've come up with for XAML. So we actually pre-compiled this thing into a binary format, we loaded that. And then there's our main page. And none of these things took any time, as you can see. I mean, I think if my app loaded in 11 milliseconds, I'd be quite happy. We can also look at the elements that were the hot elements within this period. And if you have a look at it, we spent a tiny piece of time, but most of our time, dealing with grid view items and laying them out. And that's not surprising because the most things we had on the screen were grid view items. That's what we had. And you know, you can have a look all the way down into this. You see each individual grid view item. You can see what was in there. There's a text block, a grid, a border, an image, a stat panel. And we show you exactly what you paid for those elements on the screen. Which I think is a really, really good thing. We said just yesterday, and I saw it in the keynote at Build last night, that this also works for Windows Phone 8.1, so you have the same tooling across Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8.1, which is really quite nice. So that's a nice bit of tooling. Another bit of tooling that we put in here for 8.1 is, it is a new way of driving UI tests from Visual Studio. They have this notion of a coded UI test project where you can actually drive interaction with the UI. Just to show you that very, very quickly, let's just make a, well actually we could probably have, oh no, we're not in that project. Let me go back to the recent project, the one that had a button in it. No, okay. Let me get rid of this code here. So we had a button on the screen, I think, here. If we go back over to this. Yeah, great. So this is our button, and let's imagine that we have an app in quotation marks where we need to do something like change some text, or let's change a progress bar. Let's have something like that. So there's a progress bar. Make it nice and big. And let's say what I want to do is when you click the button, I want to advance the progress bar in some fashion. So let's just go and get that handler. Oh, I didn't give the progress bar a name. That was a bad idea. Let's just give it a name. Great. Okay, so let's go back to that handler. X. And let's say this dot progress dot value equals, I think by default they're 0 to 100, so let's say 50, something like that. And let's just see if we can run that. Great, click 50, super. So from my point of view, as you know, a world-class developer, I have achieved what I wanted to achieve. It's functionally correct. I'm very happy you can ship this. might want to do something about the progress bar going off the edge of the screen, but not to worry. You could ship this thing. If I wanted to encode what I've just done, which was my quick test of how that works, into a UI test, I can do that in 2013. So you can add into here a new kind of project. Let's just see if we can add that in. We'll add a new project, a coded UI test project. Okay, my mouse is going a bit wonky up here. So I can add one of those things in, and it throws you straight away into that sort of experience. If you've used these kind of tools before, where you have to go and grab the controls and give them identities within your test. So it throws you straight into that. So I'll let it do that, that's okay. And the first thing I want to do is I actually want to find, I have no idea what the app's called, let's just find out what the app's called. App 81. Okay, so I want to go and find app 81. And I want to just drag this little crosshair onto it to get its identity. We're just going to grab that and steal this identity here. Got it. And then I'm going to run the app. So let's just go and run the app. And I'm going to grab that button that's up there and drag that and add its identity into the set of controls that my test is going to know about. Grab the progress bar up there and add its identity into the set of controls I'm going to know about. And I can also add a little assertion here, so I could say, let's find on a progress bar, property called position. So if I click the button, I want to make sure that this progress bar is at a position of, let's just add an assertion to 50, otherwise some kind of message saying it didn't work. I'm kind of encoding my test, so let's okay that. And then we can say to this little wizardy thing, go generate me some code. Give it a method name, and it's going to generate that test method for me. I think. Yeah, there it is. I can get rid of this guy. So that method encapsulates progress bar value should be 50. All I need to do to get that up and running is I can instantiate the app. So the way we do this is by saying XAML window.launch, and we give it that GUID that I stole off the screen earlier on. And then I can say now tap on the button. So I can say gesture.tap on the button that we got, captured into our UI map, and then assert that that value is equal to 50, and then we could try saying window.close and see if we can close that thing off as well. As we encode that into a little test, I can build that up. Ideally, the test explorer would show me that that test is now available to run. I should be able to go run that thing. Let's just go run that thing. Let's run everything. And what it should do is fire up that app, click the button. Yeah, I sometimes have the. What will happen? We'll go back to it. I have this sometimes on this particular machine. Is it takes. Sometimes when I do a first run, it takes an eternity to come back and say yes, that test actually passed. It will come back and say it passed at some point, and then after that, it seems to sort itself out. Suffice to say, it should come back saying that test passed. It hasn't done yet. We could try and cancel it. I have a feeling that will take a while as well. There's some kind of thing I've got on. Yeah, something I've got on this machine at the moment, but that should test, that should pass, and then say obviously we change something, it should fail. We can build it into a set of tests. There's something screwy going on in there. Is the app still running? Okay. It's not running, so we'll come back to it a little bit later on. So a few things in Visual Studio there. We had a look at those different things. I think, yeah, we had a look at those different things. We'll switch a little bit and talk about some other stuff that's happened in the runtime and in the framework. So various things that have changed around sort of user interface inside of Windows 8.1 apps. And some of these things are quite interesting, quite a bit different from what we did in 8.0. So we've got a long list of these things that we can play with. Most of them are pretty short and kind of snappy. They're not like very big discourses that take forever or anything like that. And we'll work through some of these things and talk about some of the things that we changed from the point of view of 8.1 over 8.0. Let's have a look at some of that. Let's drop back over to Visual Studio. Is it still doing that test? Should we try it again? Click the button. It just doesn't like me today, does it? The test has worked. The test is fine. Not to worry, it doesn't want to play with me, so let's get rid of that. Shame. So some of the things we changed around UI, there's a few things here. So let's start off with quite a big one in some ways. The way in which we built Windows 8.0, we talked quite a lot about integrating search into the operating system so that you could just search across all applications. If I have this project configured the right way, it should be running as a... Oh, does it not? Why does it need one of those? Bear with me 1 second, I may have unconfigured my own project. Yeah. I've broken my own project. Hang on. Why is it? Give me a second or so. Yeah, nothing wrong with it, it turns out. If we run this thing up, I could spend a long time trying to fix something that had nothing wrong with it. If you look at what we did with Windows 8, we have that search chart that appears in from the right-hand side, even on this little 1024 screen. And we made it such that we said to application developers, don't build visible search functionality into your application, integrate with the search charm by implementing the search contract. And the way this app goes off and searches for pictures on Flickr, and the way this kind of works is that in 8.0, when you brought this up, that box would not have said everywhere. The implication was you were searching the app on the screen. That's no longer the implication in Windows 8.1. This search would not search the app on the screen unless the app on the screen implements the search contract, which this one does, and you now have to change this little box to say, I'm trying to search the app, let's say for pictures of London. And that query then gets sent into the app, hopefully, and the app goes off and finds pictures of London. That's quite a different experience from where we were with Windows 8.0. Really, I think the feedback was that users did not find that particularly discoverable, despite what we might have thought that users would find particularly discoverable. So what's changed with 8.1 is we have different guidance around how you do that kind of functionality, and the guidance is put visible search on the screen. We've given you new controls to do that. If we go back over to this project and go to our main page over here, on the toolbox for XAML you will find a control called a search box. And so I can comment into this XAML file one of those search boxes. And now I have this search box. The thing about this control is we designed it to be as close to the existing search contract kind of as possible. So if you've already implemented the search contract, you should be able to rewire your code into this search box and pretty much carry on doing what you were doing before. You'll notice that if the search box is looking for suggestions as to what the user might search for, it calls you if you want it to. And when the user types in a query, it gives you a call back as you might expect. If we look at the code that I've got behind this, this is the implementation for the Windows 8.0 search contract. We get hold of a thing called a search pane. There's an event called query submitted, and I've got some code that goes off and searches Flickr. There's an event for suggestions requested, and I've got some code which asynchronously goes off and asks Flickr for suggestions as to what to search for. If we get rid of that code, which was the 8.0 search contract, which I can do by just commenting out this symbol up here, we now have event handlers for the control on the screen, and actually they just do exactly the same as I was doing in response to the search contract. So I didn't have to change my code very much, I just had to change where it was called from. And the way that shows up is if we run this thing back around, now I have a nice little search box on the screen. It's got history, as you can see. What I've been searching for wasn't too bad. If we have a look at A, for instance, we should go and call Flickr and ask what to search for with A's and B's and C's. I think I have a bug around doing this the second time because it actually, yeah, I have a bug around it. Don't see that. That's not there. But if you only do it once, it should work fine. That's my bug in the async stuff. Works fine. Nothing to do with Windows. But we've changed the way that happens. So you put a box on the screen, but the event handlers are kind of the same as they were before. Okay? That's quite a difference from where we were with Windows 8.0. I had some long discussions about that very idea with Windows 8.0, talking to some developers. A similar thing in some ways. Let's move on to a different project. Another UI thing that's quite different from where we are with 8.0. If you looked at Windows 8.0, let me just run this app. Hopefully he's in a decent state. Yeah, there he is, so that's fine. If you look at Windows 8.0, you will notice that we introduced 4 different states for an application on the screen. This state here we call full screen landscape. If I could turn the device portrait, that would be full screen portrait. We introduced an idea of pulling the application over here or on the right, and it went into a state called snapped view, which was 320 pixels wide always. And then if it was over in that space on the right hand side, the grey bit, we called that filled view. That was however big the rest of the screen was. And you could only ever have one app snapped and one app filled, and that was it. With 8.1, really, the idea of a snap view and a filled view is gone. And the idea of an app only being 320 pixels or the rest of the screen is also gone. And you can basically have an app at multiple sizes down to wherever you kind of want it, really. I'm not demonstrating that very well at 1024 by 768. But on a monitor with more screen space, you can kind of drag this down more than I can drag it down here. So the only 2 screen real layouts you've got now for a Windows 8.1 application are landscape and portrait. You may also want to support a minimum size view for your app, if that makes sense for you. What do I mean by minimum size? Well, by default, actually, if we have a look at it in the project, let's just slide him over there and have a look at this project. You'll find in the applications manifest that there's a new property in here called minimum width. And by default, that would be 500 pixels. That's the default. You can change it to be 320 pixels if you really have a case in your app where it makes sense to have a nice little thin window that a user can size down. And the way I typically do that is, like a Twitter application, I'll size it down to 320, get 1 column of tweets. I use Skype that way, I use Link that way, and I can have what I typically have is a second monitor with a bunch of these things really thinly striped, all at 320 pixels. And I think you can get up to 4 onto a monitor if they're at that sort of size. If we change this thing down to 320, we might be able to get it just a bit smaller on this screen. Let's just size it over there. Let's size it down towards 320. That's 320 on the screen. It doesn't, my app doesn't display very nicely at 320, but you can see we've shrunk this down a little bit more. And the only thing this app is doing is it's just making a decision between portrait and landscape. Landscape, as you can see, portrait, as you can see. The way in which it does that is dead simple. If we have a look at it, just find the code behind this. We're handling the size changed on the page, so whenever the size changes, we'll have a look at things. And when the size changes, we get the current application view. We ask a few questions. You can ask a few questions like, am I next to the left edge of the display or the right edge of the display? But fundamentally, what is my orientation? Is it portrait or landscape? There was another API, there still is another API, that will return you snapped, filled, full screen landscape, full screen portrait. That API is deprecated for Windows 8.1. You should use this API to say, am I portrait or am I landscape? What I do in this particular application is I use the traditional technique. It makes it sound like woodwork, doesn't it? The traditional technique of the visual state manager to drive a portrait state and a landscape state. So when we work out which state you're in, I simply pass that down into this function here that talks to the visual state manager and says, hey, go to portrait or landscape. And of course, if we had a look in the XAML, there's a visual state for portraits and a visual state for landscape, and it just shows some things and hides some things, and that's kind of all it does. Sure.
Was it portrait flipped and landscape flipped?
Yeah, I think we're just portrait landscape. I think we're just portrait and landscape. I don't know that I met anybody who did anything different for a flipped landscape than a regular landscape. I don't think anyone did that. So that's a difference, quite a key difference on applications. And if you pull an application out of the store, I don't know if I've got one here, who might do this? I don't want to pick on an application, but if you pull an application out of the store, it's still an 8.0 application, and size it down, you'll find that 500 pixels, you get black letterboxing down the side of it, because it's still supporting a 320 pixel wide snap view. So you'll spot an 8.0 application because it doesn't size to the 500 pixels. You get black bands down the side of it. A few other things we've done with UI. One is around the idea, and this is an interesting one to me. Let me kind of show you what this thing does. Let's just run this application up. Slowly, it seems to me that we're getting back to the idea that on the operating system called Windows, we might have some windows. And we're heading there, I think. I saw some more things announced yesterday that seem to suggest we're heading more in this direction. Windows 8.1 allows a modern application to open more than one window. You can think of scenarios for this, like Skype, like Mail, and lots of different scenarios. So this application, when you tap on one of these photos here, what it actually does is it runs up a second window. A second window belonging to this application. We can play around with that and size it how we want, and we get rid of it. It's still there. It's still alive. It's still there. I didn't make this automatic, but there's a little API call you can make to say, get me my windows and tell me about my windows. If we open up another one, and then make that API call again, now we've got 3 windows. And if we go back to these windows and get rid of that one, and get rid of that one, we should find we've only got 1 open window at that point. So we have windows and we have window management, much as you might expect Windows to have. How do we do this stuff? It's relatively simple. Let's just find a bit of code that does that. So on picture in new window. The key thing that you do here is this call to core application, create me a new view. And this is a bit devious. You've got your main view over here with a dispatcher thread on it, a UI thread. And when you create a second view, that's another window, and it has its own thread. And those 2 threads are not really meant to directly talk to each other, so that there's no risk of them deadlocking each other. You know, A asks B to do something, and B calls back to A, and then your application hangs. So we've got this other thread. So what this code here is doing, let's go back over there. It's saying, hey, when that new view is ready, get its dispatcher and ask it to run this method for me. And that will grab hold of the new window that's just been created, the new view that's just been created. Consolidated is really a closed event handler. That's how we know when things have been closed. And then we kind of do the standard startup stuff that you do in a Windows 8 app. We create a new frame, I navigate it to a page that displays the image, and I put that frame into that window. And then finally, there's an API call to say, now display that new window, in this case side by side with the existing parent window. You can have different options about how you display it. So it's really create a new window, get onto its thread, create content, put it in the window, get it on the screen. Not too bad, not too difficult, hopefully. Somewhat similar to that, if you looked at Windows 8.0, and I had long discussions with customers about this, if application 1 wanted to launch application 2 using something like a URI scheme, so like I want to open the browser, or I want to open the Maps app, or I want to open Skype, what would happen was application 1, there's an API called launcher, and you can say, hey, launch this file for me, launch this URI for me, and we go into the operating system and launch the apps that handle that particular URI scheme. What would happen though is app 1 would get off the screen altogether, and app 2 would come in, And then I had discussions with users who said, well, actually developers who said, but my user is confused because the first app seems to have disappeared and they don't know how to get back to it. It's kind of been replaced by this second app. So we changed that a little bit in Windows 8.1. This little button here launches the Maps app with just a URI to ask you to go and search for coffee shops. But when it launches it up, as you'll see, it has a view as to how much of the screen the Maps app should take and how much of the screen the existing app should take. And it becomes kind of clear that this app launched that app. We'll just do that again. This app launched that app. And it allows the user very quickly to say, yeah, that's the map I wanted, and go back over there. Interesting to say that since I built this demo, that's actually launching a different Maps application than it was when I first ran this demo, so it's quite interesting that it's a different Maps application. Very, very simple to do. If we go back over to the code over here, this API is already in Windows 8.1. Launch a URI for me. This URI scheme is published by the big Maps application. Lots of apps have lots of URI schemes. The only thing we're saying is we pass a launch options instance, and we add a new property to that saying how much of the screen does your app want when the other app comes up. And in this case I say size my app down to its minimum size. I could equally say Alt F12. I could easily say use a bit less, use half the screen, use a bit more, use the minimum as I said, or use none. Get my application off the screen altogether, I don't want it on there. So I can do that kind of thing. So that's quite nice. I think it makes a big difference for users. I met users that were a bit confused about how apps were seem to disappear and come back. So that's quite a nice thing to be able to do. If you launch something like an email or a document or something like that. And then the last thing on this particular screen is that we've added new tile options to Windows 8.1. There are two new tile sizes. There's a tiny tile size, which I don't have anything of that size at the moment. Let me just resize this guy. So there's a 70 by 70 tile size, and there's also a huge tile size, a 310 by 310 tile size. Those are new on Windows 8.1. Let me just unpin that from the start screen. Go back to my app. We've also, the experience for creating a second or third or fourth tile on the user's screen has always been one where you call an API and then a dialog pops up for the user to say, yes, I'm happy for this app to pin a new tile to my screen. We've given you a slightly richer API there such that when you want to pin a new tile, you can now offer the user a set of options as to how they want to pin that tile and what kind of imagery they want to use. So in this particular case, I've gone all out and I've offered the user a tiny tile with a green image on it, or a blue or a red. A red one, a green one, or a blue one, or a regular size square tile with red, green, or blue images, or a wide tile with those images, or a massive tile with those images. So you can say, hey, you want to pin Manchester United to your start screen, but do you want this image, or this image, or this image? You know, what's best for you? Or you want to pick the weather for London, what would you like? A picture of Tower Bridge, would you like a picture of a big sun, or what do you want? And just make it more personal for them. It's just a nice thing to do, so we can then pin that to the start screen. And hopefully somewhere down there, yeah, somewhere down there, we've got a nice big tile on the start screen, kind of there. This is just a change to an existing API. So if we have a look at the code, when it comes time to pin, we create a new secondary tile, and you have more options around the visual elements that the user might want to use. And more importantly, there's even a dynamic event handler where the system will call you back and say, okay, I'm now putting that dialog onto the screen. Would you like to add any more visual elements to show to the user? And without really digging through that code too much, this is my little loop where I add all those different size images and names into the display that goes on the screen. It's not too complicated to do. And yeah, that's kind of how it is. So that's another option that we've got there, which is quite an interesting one to play with. Where are we at? Oh yeah, not too bad. A couple of other things. One of the things that a lot of these applications do is you might be building a XAML-based application, but a lot of these applications displays at least some mixture of HTML content. So it's quite common for a XAML-based app to be doing something with HTML. And in Windows 8.0, we had a relatively limited control. I think did we call it WebView or did we call it web browser? It escapes me off the top of my head. We had a WebView web browser control that you could load HTML content into and display it. It was quite limited in terms of what it could do. I met a number of devs who were banging up against the limitations of this thing. Specifically, for instance, I meet a lot of people who have packaged HTML content, might be something like a newspaper or a magazine, in something like a zip file, and they download it into the apps folder, expand it out, and then they load it up with an HTML view inside of their XAML application. That was actually quite hard stroke, practically impossible with Windows 8.0. And the web view control that we gave developers was really not that functional in my opinion. It was quite limited. We've built, or let's say enhanced the web view control for 8.1 such that we make it a lot more functional than it was. And that's true across XAML and also, interestingly, HTML JavaScript as well, that also has a web view control. That's kind of an interesting one, but I won't get into that here. So let's just have a look at how this might look. If we make a new project for a second, kind of a simple one. So let's just make a blank application and get to some UI in here. Let's just find the main page over here and drop something on there. So in our toolbox now we have a new control, web view. I can drag that out onto the design surface. Let's just reset it so it takes a lot of space. And let me just put something that I can click on top of it. We'll put that sort of there. And let's just make sure that we can see that. And just give it a little opacity. And so we've got a little button there that we can write code behind, and let's just change that web view so it has a name. And I think, let me just double click that button. I think this is going to defeat my own purpose, as it usually does. One of the things about dragging a web view onto that design surface is it seems to break the IntelliSense around that web view. I don't think that it gives me IntelliSense on it. I want to get that IntelliSense, so I'm just going to do a quick restart of Visual Studio. Because something breaks in there when we brought one of those things onto the design surface. And it's back. I don't know what that is. It'd be nice if there was a button that said restart the IntelliSense service, but I don't know how to do that. So we've got a web view on there. Now, as you can already do, you can take this thing and you can navigate it somewhere. So you can say, hey, navigate to, somewhere. I usually navigate to, where should we go? DevWeek.com. The funny website, DevWeek.com. Let's go there. So we can go there and we can run that up, click the button, navigate to DevWeek.com, hopefully. There's DevWeek.com. So that's all nice. You could do that before. You could also, before, navigate to a string. So if you just had some HTML, you could do navigate to string, and you could navigate like that as well. We've implemented a couple of other ways of navigating this control, and a bunch of other events on it as well. Let me try and just illustrate that with IntelliSense. Let's have a look at content events. So we have new events for when the control is loading content, when it has loaded the DOM content, when it's loading content into a frame and the DOM content is loaded within a frame, when our phishing filter detects that the content you're looking at it thinks is unsafe, we fire an event into your code. Or when the browser says, I've come across something and I don't know what it is, we fire an event into your code. Let's have a look at some script events on here. It's always been the case that the web view, you can write code that makes it execute JavaScript for you, and from that JavaScript you can fire events back into your .NET code. But that's always been something that we've extended a little bit here. You can still invoke script, but you can also invoke script asynchronously, so that if the web view goes off and does something horrible, that doesn't affect your calling application. It doesn't kind of make you look bad, if you like. You'll notice that we can also fire an event back to you. You know when Internet Explorer and Chrome does this as well. When Internet Explorer says, I've come across a long-running script and do you want to kill it? We fire an event back into your code for that, saying, hey, we've encountered a long-running script and you might want to do something about that. Those kind of things. We also have a bunch more navigation events. So navigation completed, navigation failed, navigation starting. Do we have more navigations? Those kind of events. I thought we had one or two more on there, but that's what I'm finding at the moment. And then in terms of different ways of navigating, there's two of those things that I'll show you. We have load up a web page, load up a string. One of the things with navigating just to a URL is that we're always just going to do a vanilla HTTP GET on that URL, and there's no way for you to affect things like the cookies that might get sent, or the headers that might get sent, or the HTTP verb that we might use. So we've changed that. You can create yourself a thing called an HTTP request message. Let's make a message. And on there you can specify the HTTP method. I'm still going to use a GET, but it could be a post, put, delete, patch, whatever you want to do. And the URI. This was DevWeek.com. And then you can play around with that message. So you can play around with the headers, the method, and so on and so forth. And then when you've got the message in the shape that you want it, you can say to the web view, navigate with that message. So you can kind of pre-configure stuff and then tell it to go navigate with that particular message. And then the ultimate form of this is there's another API here called, just get rid of this. There's another API here called navigate to local stream URI. And you need to pass this thing an implementation of an interface called iURI to stream resolver. And what you're basically doing in that case is you are taking over the responsibility of resolving all content for the browser, which might involve going to the web, it might involve going to the local disk, whatever it is you want to do, you can plug that in and do whatever you want to do for that particular resolution. I'll just try and show you that very, very quickly. I've got a simple snippet problem for this. Let's just see. So I can throw in a class that implements that interface. Just bear with me 1 second while we resolve a whole bunch of stuff. So this interface only has one method on it, which is essentially, if I give you a URI, will you give me a stream of the stuff that's supposed to come back from that URI? What I do here is I simply look into the application package for a folder called HTML content. So if we make one of those, and within there, I take the path from the URI, I throw away everything but the file on the end of it, and I kind of expect to find that file in that HTML content folder. I've got some HTML content somewhere on my disk. We just go and grab some HTML content. Just copy all that. Navigate back over to Visual Studio. Drop that in there. I think there's 2 files in here that don't quite set themselves up properly as content, so let's just make those into content. And then the only thing I need to do is make sure that when we navigate the web view, we're navigating to URI with a new one of those classes I just showed you, and we navigate to default.html, which is this guy here. And with that in place, we should be able to read that HTML content quite nicely off the local disk. And it's a nice little Minesweeper game that I copied off the web somewhere. And that all plays with sound, with font, with everything, all being loaded from the local disk. And so if you'd encountered problems with the web view control, you couldn't take this out, you couldn't take so much control over what it's doing, that's kind of resolved. We can do that kind of stuff with the web view control in 8.1. A few other things I'll try and show you here, and let's just pop back over to where we were in Explorer. Let me come back up to there. A couple of things. We've implemented some text-to-speech APIs. These are fairly simple, so I can show you that very quickly. You give the API some text, it speaks it for you. So very, very simple little application. I don't know if the volume's very loud on this machine. I don't have any audio out, so you might just be able to hear the thing speak. You give it some text,
what would you like me
pass
to
it to an
say,
API,
Michael?
it speaks in different voices,
What would you like me to say, Michael?
so on and so forth.
What would you like me to say, Michael?
You can also pass speech markup language into this thing, SSML, which I don't know particularly well. I managed to hack together a tiny little piece of it, and really all I did was put some little breaks into the speech. But you can also do that.
Like me to say, Michael?
And give it a little bit of pausing in there as well. You can take full control as to how we voice this stuff. The API set for this is pretty simple. There is a class called a speech synthesizer. You can ask it, what speech voices have you got? It's quite easy. And then what you do is you give it a piece of text and you say, turn that into speech in an audio stream for me, shove it into a media element and tell the media element to play the speech. So it's very, very simple. We don't have APIs to go the other way, and beyond the regular accessibility stuff that you have in Windows anyway. You can drive any of these apps with accessibility voice stuff, but we don't have anything to go the other way. Right now we just have text-to-speech in here. So that's quite nice. And then one other thing that, again, a lot of people asked me about for Windows 8.0 was the ability to render PDF documents. In a Windows 8.0 app, you can, of course, invoke a PDF viewer, but it's a separate app that comes onto the screen and displays the PDF and then goes away. In Windows 8.1, we added APIs to support rendering PDF documents inside of your app. So I took a PDF document, I bundled it into this app, and so here I am rendering a PDF document inside this app. I also put a bit of semantic zoom in here with some thumbnails, navigate around, and play with that kind of thing. It's all quite nice. Go over there. Very, very simple to do. If we look at the code for this, actually the way I do this is horrible, so don't take any credit from this. It's a horrible way of doing it. But I have a PDF document embedded in the application package. And then when the application starts up, I get hold of that file out of the application package, use a new API, PDF document, load from this file asynchronously. Now we've got the document loaded. And the PDF document, if we have a look at it with Alt F12, it's quite simple. It'll tell you how many pages there are, and then it will get you particular pages. So that's quite simple. And so I do a bit of messing around. I actually do a bad thing, really. I build all the images up front. I build all the thumbnails and all the pages. This would not be a practical way of rendering an arbitrary PDF document, but it's a demo. What I do is then loop through all the pages, and I ask them to paint themselves to images twice, once at the thumbnail size and once at the full size. And painting themselves to images is just a matter of walking up to the document, getting the page, creating a memory stream, creating some rendering options, and then asking the page to render itself as an image into a stream. So it's pretty simple. And you can do some nice things with this. Obviously, you probably only really render 1 or 2 pages at a time. You know, perhaps the page the user was on and the next one, the previous one. And you could add annotations and things onto documents. You could do all kinds of fancy stuff if you wanted to, because fundamentally the API is open the document, get me a page, render it to a bitmap of this size. And so it's quite a simple API. But it means that you can have PDF inside of your applications rather than outside of your applications, which is quite nice. Oh, there's a couple of other things I didn't talk about there. One other thing I'll just talk about briefly. I'm just conscious of the time. We did implement a new kind of application. If you look at Windows 8, 8.1, the applications that came out of Bing all had a kind of common look and feel to them. They looked a bit like this travel application, where you have a big, they typically call it a hero image. That's what they call it. A big hero image on the screen here, and then you navigate across and there's a list here, and then there's a different layout of stuff here, and a different layout of stuff here. Go to Andy Murray's hotel by the looks of it. And then a different layout of stuff here, a list there, and so on and so forth. We called this a hub application, and a lot of developers came along and said, I like that. How do I build one of those? And we said, well, you're on your own. We've built it. We haven't given you anything to help. So with 8.1, we did give you something to help. Got too many apps running on my screen. Let's just go back over here. We did give you something to help. Visual Studio. It's called a hub application template. Just create one of those very quickly and run it up. It doesn't look as exciting as the Bing application in the first instance. You'd have to do some work. It gives you a big grey image, and then there's a section here, and there's a section there, and there's a grid view here, and there's another section there. We can navigate in, and once again, the items never have any content on them. Kind of that. What that uses is a new control. If we just have a look at the UI here. What that uses is a new control. Let's just find the document outline. It's a hub control, and a hub control has a header, which in this case you'll probably be able to see. Let's just pin that out there. Is the grid with the button and the title just up there. And then any number of hub sections. And hub sections are really free form, because within inside any hub section, you have, again, a header, but you also have a data template. So inside a hub section, you can put whatever you want, and we will just display it for you. So you'll find some of these sections have relatively complex things. I think section 3 there has a grid view within it, so that's quite a complex section. So we just give you this control hub, and you can just put whatever content you want into it. If you were watching some of the stuff we did at the Build conference yesterday, you would have seen some stuff about Windows Phone 8.1, which also has a new hub control. It's the same hub control that we implement for Windows Phone 8.1 as we implement for Windows 8.1, which is nice. That's a nice thing that we do. So just to give you that illustration of this thing. Let's come back to that. So coming back up to our third section, and just our last for 5 or 10 minutes here, I just want to talk about some of the things we've done at the Windows Store, which is your shop window onto the world, effectively, for these applications, unless you're building enterprise applications. We've done a whole bunch of things here, again, based largely on feedback. When it comes to things like what we've got on the screen here, being able to buy things from your application, we took a lot of feedback that developers wanted to be able to have in-app purchases for items that can be bought multiple times. The typical example of this is games developers, where you can buy like a pack of power-up pills or something like that for the game. So you buy those, you spend £1 or whatever it is, you get your pack of power-up pills, you use them, and then that developer wants to sell another pack of power-up pills to that user, and another pack, and another pack, and another pack. Consumable in-app purchases wasn't something we supported in the store for Windows 8.1. We added that, for Windows 8.0. We added that for Windows 8.1. The other thing is about large catalogs. It might be that you've got a lot of items that you want to sell through the store. We only support, I think, listing 100 actually in our store portal. And you probably don't want to sit down and list 100 anyway. So what we've done is we've changed APIs here such you can list an item in the store at, let's say, a price of £1. But then at runtime, when you want to sell me that item, you can make a slightly modified API call to change the description as to what it is you're actually selling me. So you can have one item in the store at £1, but you could sell it under 20 different labels or 1,000 different labels by querying some other catalogue that you've got. Then you can have items priced at £2, and you could label those whichever way you want. So we kind of hope that gives people enough flexibility to sell what they want to sell from the store. We have the idea of redeemable credit in the store. So there's options now where you can go into your store app on the device, and you can enter a code that you got either off a physical card. I can give you a card that gives you £10 of credit in the store, or you can just go into your account with a credit card and add more money onto a store account. Probably one of the scenarios for that is where people have got kids that they want to give a device, and they give them £10 of credit. but they don't want to give their child access directly to their credit card so they can spend another £1,000 of credit. You want to be able to say, here's £10, play and tell me when you've run out of that £10. Don't just be able to access my full account. So we have this idea of redeemable credit. It also means that people like me could give people like you £20 to spend in the store. I'm not going to do that, by the way, but I could do. I don't have any cards. And we changed the way that updates work. By default now in Windows 8.1, applications are automatically updated. We don't bring down the updates and then put them into a little holding pen and then say to the user, would you like to update 7 apps? By default, we just update their apps. So it's an interesting thing because some days I run apps and they've changed. And it always surprises me. And this isn't the same as it was yesterday, an automatic update. And some days I run apps, and this is where app developers may not have done quite the right thing, apps that I've already given credentials to in the past, and suddenly they ask me for credentials again, and I think, this app's been updated. That shouldn't actually happen, but you will notice that happening with certain apps in the store, and you think, you must have had an update on this, because I'm suddenly being prompted for credentials. And then the other thing we did was we changed the user experience on our store app itself. So we actually rewrote the store app, and we changed the way it presents your applications, and we changed the way in which it does searching. So we plugged in the Bing search engine behind it so that we can have more of a personalized service around what apps might actually apply to you, what apps you might be looking for, what apps you like. And if you saw some of the stuff again we did a build yesterday, you'll know that we're doing more and more work with that Bing search engine to learn about people and to understand who you are and what it is you like, so that we can be really smart in delivering things that might be of genuine interest to you. So we changed some things with the store. I think based on where we are, I won't really go demo this. Maybe I'll just drop into the store app and show you one more thing. Actually, I didn't just mention, we also changed the way applications are packaged. We have this new notion of a thing called an application bundle. If you've looked at Windows Store apps, you'll know that we build an AppX file out of all the bits that you provide. An AppX file is just a zip file. What we've done with 8.1, when you come to build your package for the store, you might have a package that includes English resources, US English resources, French, Spanish, Japanese. You also might have imagery for different kinds of devices. If you've looked at Windows, you can provide imagery at different scales. 100% scale, 140% scale, 180% scale. What we do with the packaging system for 8.1 is we shred all those out into separate bundles, unless you tick the option that says don't. And what that means is that when the Japanese user on their 100% scale device goes to the store, we only download the bits that are relevant for that particular user on that particular device. We don't download, the French resources that they're never ever going to use. We don't download the 180% scaled images that aren't going to be used on their device. You might be thinking, well, what happens if they change the language? Well, actually, we go off and then get the extra bits for them at that point. But by default, it means that, and especially this is very relevant for games, you can have some very, very big assets in games that you don't necessarily want to download if the user's not going to use them. And so that can cut down on download sizes. And just as an aside, we do some very smart things around updating Windows apps. We already do this. If you change your 20 megabyte app package, but you only change one file and a few bytes within it, we do have a block map on the device of what we had before and what's now on the store, and we only change the delta. We don't download the whole 20 megs again, which can be very relevant if you're on a mobile connection or something like that. Based on the time, though, I don't think I won't drop into all of these things. Just to, if you haven't been in here, just to talk about the 8.1 store UX just for a moment. First, you'll notice, of course, it's now got a super large tile. That's a 310 by 10, 310 tile. From an app developer's point of view, why would you care? Well, you care because it's the first thing I see every morning when I come to this screen, and it's promoting stuff to me that's your apps right now, and you can fit even 3 on the screen right in front of my eyes every morning. I go here hundreds of times a day and get advertised stuff. Of course, you can turn it off, but most people won't. I don't. And if you navigate into the store, it has a new section here for promoting apps. What would you say? That section is taking 3/4 of my screen, which is great. That's where apps are being placed right in front of me straight away. being suggested to me. And then we simplified the store UX a lot. We have our top categories, stuff that Bing thinks is relevant to me. I don't know that the Brightstone Mysteries Paranormal Hotel is something I'm not necessarily going to play, but it's worked that out for me. What's trending on the store? What's new and rising on the store, and then the top paid apps and the top free apps, and that's kind of it in terms of what you get on this section. You still have the navigation that we had before. If I swipe from the top, you've got the navigation bar that will drop in from the top. So you can go to a particular category, which is more how we drove the store previously. So you can go to social, for instance. And then again, you get a view as to apps here, new and rising, top paid, top free. And if you really want to, you can go and drop into seeing more, or you can just drop into top free and have a look at those top free social applications. If you want to search for apps, again, we power this with Bing. I've got a few apps in the store. I used to search for my apps previously on the 8.0 store, and they didn't typically show up. I have a QR code app within the store, and I hope that if I search with the Bing engine, there goes my competition, and there's me. And so we actually find my app, which was a big step forward for me, because we didn't used to. And we get a nicer display around an application. So firstly, a nice thing again for me is it shows you that I've got other applications in the store, which I quite like. And then if we navigate back over, I get my screenshots of my app, which is quite nice. My rating's going down, that's good to see this morning. Thanks very much. And I get my ratings and reviews there for this particular market, and then details over this way. But the simple thing is that we get a very clear, easy view of what this application is about with its ratings presented over here. Just a couple of other things we talked about on the slide, I think. If we have a look at my account over here, you'll notice that here is where I can redeem credit that somebody gave me. If you gave me £10 for the store, that's where I can redeem credit. And also, if we go to settings and we go to updates, you can see there's the automatically update apps that I talked about. We also changed the number of apps that you can install onto all your PCs. Sorry, let me rephrase this. We also changed the limit as to how many devices you can install an app onto when you bought it from the store. I think before it was 5 or 6, and I think we upped it to some big number like 100 or something like that. I'm not exactly sure remembering what the number is. We changed it to a place where we thought was sensible that almost nobody would ever hit. So if I bought your app on this device, I can install it on my Venue Pro, I can install it on my Surface RT, and I don't have to buy it again. And if you watched what we were talking about at the Build conference last night, you'll know that in the future I will also be able to install it on my phone as well, as long as you agree to that as a developer to link the two accounts together and for the particular application. So apologies for missing a couple of demos there, but I went a little bit wonky on the time. Hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the things we've done in Windows 8.1. Yesterday at Build we talked about Windows 8.1, is it called Spring Update? The update that's coming anyway next week. I don't think that will change a whole bunch of stuff from the point of view of the app developer. I don't think I'll be able to get up and do another hour and a half about all the things we've changed there. It's more things we've tweaked in the operating system itself. So it's more things that I don't think as a dev you're going to get a whole bunch of new APIs and a whole bunch of new capabilities. What we talk about here will continue to be relevant even after next week. So don't get the fear that, oh, hang on, it's just told me about 8.1, but I know there's another version coming. That's tweaks that we're making to the OS, I think, rather than lots of API changes again. If you want more on this stuff, I've put together one sort of annotated slide deck. There is a cracking document on the web which walks you through some of this. And then I've got an expanded set of slides, and what it does is it links to all a bunch of recorded videos that delves into each topic. So if there's particular topics where you thought, I want to know more about that PDF rendering, I want to know more about multiple windows, I want to know more about those kinds of things, grab this set of slides, and there's links in there to videos of online sessions that will do an hour on each one of those topics. And we kind of skipped across the top of it. Other than that, thank you for coming along and thank you for your patience. These are long sessions. I hope you found it useful. I hope you got some kind of tour around these things. If you're interested in Windows 8, Windows 8.1 apps, And you might also be interested in Windows Phone apps. I've got a follow-on session. It's not this again. It's a different session. Talking about building for both Windows Phone and Windows 8, and also kind of in the light of what we talked about yesterday at Build, which is the upcoming release of Windows Phone 8.1, and how we're starting to unify that developer platform across Windows Phone 8.1 and Windows 8.1. I can't remember exactly which room it's in, but if you want to come along, that starts in about half an hour's time, and it's in the North Rotunda on level 4 apparently. So it'd be nice to see you there if you want to come along to that one. If you're sick of listening to me after 90 minutes, I fully understand. I get sick of listening to me too. Enjoy the rest of the day, enjoy the rest of the week. Thanks a lot for coming along, and I might see you later on. Thank you.